I was just like so hooked on everything architecture, but I wanted to focus on where technology could go with architecture, because to me it didn't seem weird to be drawing on computer. I don't know why, but it didn't.
Welcome to Inside the Apple Studio, a podcast that talks with architects to learn how they use Apple products in the practice of architecture, with your host, Neal Pan. Joining me on this episode is an architect that has created a firm specializing in creating zero net energy homes and has expanded to include her passion for visual arts with a network of artists for commissioned works, including her own artwork. She built her firm embracing a virtual office model long before world events forced architectural offices to adapt to remote working, and has been asked to speak and train other architects across the nation on virtual office and remote working strategies. I'd like to welcome architect Jennifer Kretschmer to the show. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you for having me, Neal.
Before we get to how you kind of structured your firm, I'm curious, what inspired you to become an architect?
Oh, well, that's both a long and short story, but I'll start with a little bit, since we have time, a little bit of the long story on that. And I'm going to go back even to before I was born. So I am the product of a Peruvian mother who came to the United States and met my father in California, who had moved here from Indiana. And here is Silicon Valley, by the way.
Right.
And my mother was an accountant, an artist, and she loved to sew. And my father was a mechanical engineer, a avid carpenter, a veteran of the Navy. He was in the Korean War. And loved cars. So as you can see, they both had professional lives, but also a very rich hobby life. And in having parents that were that eclectic, I was often given the opportunity to try different things, as well as, I spent a lot of time on boats. But I also did a lot of carpentry. My father had no problem with throwing a piece of wood at me and say, go over to that tool and make this thing for me.
Oh, fun. Okay.
I never really got into cars. I have a younger brother. He really got into cars with my dad.
Nice.
But
Okay.
and then my mom loved to draw and paint and taught me to do the same. And so I just had this, experience, as well as another background too, is that I was a competitive figure skater too. So,
Oh, really?
I ice skated, and in the, early in the morning, and then in the afternoon I was woodworking with my dad. So yes, I had this real dichotomy of life that was going on.
Yeah, very eclectic.
Yeah. And so from that, and all those experiences, I love to draw, I love to paint, and I really felt like I was very artistically inclined. But I always had this draw to engineering as well. And
Mm.
I wasn't great at math, but I was decent at math. It didn't frighten and scare me. So, and being exposed to engineering, some of my first jobs were, I worked at one of the companies my dad worked at. Um, they made robots.
Oh, wow. Fascinating.
They made assembly line robots, and they had me in there like sorting screws and and running the blueprint machine.
Oh, yeah. The
So
good old blueprint machine with the that wonderful ammonia smell.
yeah, yeah. So I had those experiences in the background, and when it came to like looking at careers, I really wanted something that was that took my skills of math and engineering, but still also paid homage to the fact that I love to paint, and I really felt that I was more of an artist. And I just happened upon architecture through, one of those tests you take in middle school.
Sure.
They see, what do you like? What do you like? And then it spits out, what your careers are. And my
Right.
careers uh, were artist, of course, um, uh, um, advertising,
Oh, interesting.
and architecture. And I'm like,
Okay.
so architecture, I do like buildings. I do like, I like woodworking. I loved, helping dad around the house. Let me
Yeah.
find out more about that. And so I was 12 at that time.
Okay.
And so I really started investigating more. What is architecture? What is the career of architecture? Because architecture as a thing is different from architecture as a career, right?
Right.
And I didn't come across anything that was a negative for me, even the negatives. So I'm like,
All the
okay,
years of school weren't a deterrence.
didn't bother me a bit. In fact, it seemed a little less than trying to go for engineering and then getting a master's degree, right? So,
Okay.
um, and so as I mentioned, I was born in Stanford at Palo Alto. We lived in Palo Alto, and then we moved to Sunnyvale. So,
Okay.
and I lived right on the border of Cupertino. So Sunnyvale, right on the border of
Hmm.
Cupertino. And again, I was seeing where architecture was going. My dad took a CAD class at a local junior college, and we were like one of the first people on our street to own a computer. We actually owned an Atari, which is
Oh,
from
wow.
Sunnyvale. We owned
Yes.
3 Ataris actually at one time, and one of those little robots that you had.
So an actual Atari computer, not just the 2600 or something video game.
Yeah, we had a 400, an 800, and an 800 XL. And in fact, I got the 800 in a box behind me right now.
Oh,
But
wow. Okay.
um, and so also in going to Cupertino schools, both Atari and Apple were donating computers to our school.
Right.
So I had that exposure. I had my dad going to CAD classes. He took a model making class, and I was just like so hooked on everything architecture. But I wanted to focus on where technology could go with architecture.
Okay.
Because to me, it didn't seem weird to be drawing on computer. I don't know why, but it didn't. so so anyway, that's at that early age. I was like, yeah, I'm going for architecture. And once I learned about Cal Poly, my freshman year of high school, I
Uh-huh.
never looked at any other university. I
Is that
basically
right?
focused on Cal Poly and got into Cal Poly right out of high school. So
Oh, that's great.
those are the very early years, and that's kind of all the things that just inspired me towards architecture. I like to use my hands. I like to draw. I like to. I like the engineering of it. Making a bridge in high school and then breaking it was just, oh,
Right.
that was fun. So I think I was always inclined in that direction, and I think the fact that I had these parents, that one was extremely artistic, even though her career was accounting, and this dad who liked woodworking and carpentry, right? But was also an engineer. Just like they came together and just made me, basically, which just seemed to speak architect. So
Yeah. Well, it makes a lot of sense then that you chose Cal Poly, which ironically we overlapped at Cal Poly. We were there virtually at the same time, well,
I
for several
know.
years at the same time.
I can't believe we never met each other, but yeah, yeah,
Well, I think you started maybe a couple of years after me. I know we were not in like the same design classes. That
yeah.
then you kind of hung out with the same people in your studio classes that were the same year of you, or that you were. So that's probably why we didn't ever meet.
Yeah, a lot of that was, yeah, staying within your studio. But I was the AIAS president at one time, which did overlap lots of different
Now,
years.
what year were you AIAS president? Because I was involved with AIA. Oh my goodness, that's too many letters to
I know.
say. AIAS as well, but that was probably 90 91.
Yeah, I think my first year as a in the AIAS and on the board
Uh-huh.
was I was the treasurer, I believe, in 91,
Oh,
90. It was either 90 91 or 91 92. It's hard to remember all of this stuff.
okay.
But
Sure.
and then I was president the following year after I was treasurer.
Okay.
And then the following year after that, I was student director of the AIA California Council. Um,
Okay.
that I know was 93, 94. So yeah, okay, because I still have business cards from that.
Nice.
So then
Okay.
it was 90, 90, 92, 93, I was president, and then it was 91, 92, I was treasurer.
And that would make a lot of sense there because I was in Italy 92 93. So
Oh,
then we completely missed each other maybe by about a year with our involvement in AIAS.
yeah, yeah. I went to quite a few of those forums too.
Oh,
Did you
you
ever
did?
did? Yeah.
I went to one, but that I think that was in '89 that I went to that. That was in New Orleans. It was an
Yes,
opportunity to
everybody
go to New
told me
Orleans.
about that one. It was sounded like it was the best, right?
Yeah, it
Yeah.
was pretty great
Yeah.
actually.
Yeah, I think I went to two or three after the New Orleans one. So, yeah.
Okay. All right. Yeah, no, that was a lot of fun. I think that was we had to fly back like the day after because it happens over Thanksgiving.
Yes.
And flying back on a Sunday of Thanksgiving is just very expensive. And we were students. So we skipped Monday of school and ended up flying back to LA and then driving from LA back to San Luis on Monday. So earlier that week, I noticed that they're now the Los Angeles Rams again. Were playing the Saints on Sunday Night Football that year. On that Sunday that we were held over. And so I ended up buying a ticket and went to the Saints Rams game, which ended up going into overtime. And the Saints won. So that was great. The hometown team won. Everyone figured since I was from California, I was for the Rams, but that wasn't true. So I just wanted to see a great game. But yeah, that was a lot of fun. Good.
That was a
The
lot of fun.
AIS conventions. And I think I went to, what was it called? Grassroots during the summer
Yeah.
in DC. I went to one of those as
I went to
well.
one of those too. Yeah, I don't remember what year that was. But yeah, they called us up in the George Washington University dorms, and
Yeah, it
yeah, that was a lot of fun.
was one of my first experiences with really sweltering heat and humidity of DC during the summer.
Exactly.
I don't
Exactly.
recommend it.
Yeah.
So while you were at Cal Poly, I did want to you had mentioned to me before that you worked in the computer lab. What was that your first experience kind of using a Mac? How did the whole working in the computer lab at Cal Poly come about?
Well, my first experience using a Mac was actually in high school.
Okay.
But I actually learned to program on Apple IIe's when I was 13 years old at the Apple Computer Camp
Is that right?
hosted by Apple, and I was one of two young girls in the entire camp that year, and
Wow.
two of the students in that camp who created a game out of that camp actually uh, produced something that Apple sold. It was a little I can't remember the game, but it was a little spaceship
Okay.
game. So those are my first exposures to Apple were being in the Cupertino School District. That they were donated to our school. They encouraged the student body to use them, and they even took the parents. I have a lovely old school Apple keychain with the rainbow color from
Yeah.
when they took the mothers of the PTA out to the opera.
Oh,
So Steve
wow.
Wozniak took all the moms out to the opera one year,
Uh-huh.
to continue to encourage the Apple indoctrination.
Sure. Clearly it worked.
So other than an Atari computer, I've never used any computer other than an Apple product. But I got my first Macintosh was a Mac 2CI in 1990.
Okay.
I bought it from the El Corral bookstore at Cal
Yeah.
Poly, and super expensive too.
Yes, they
But
were.
with the experience that I had in owning my own computer, that led to the job at the computer lab in the
Oh, okay.
architecture department
Right.
at Cal Poly. Um, there was a lab that had something, I think we had somewhere between 30 and 35 Macintoshes. They were almost all Apple Apple II Mac 2 CIs,
Uh-huh.
which was a very boxy desktop computer that you actually put the monitor on top of the
Right.
box.
Right.
Um, and we had software wise, we had our early version of ArchiCAD,
Yeah.
2D version. We had Architrion. I believe we had an early version of MiniCAD, which later became Vectorworks.
Yeah.
Plus, we had all the word processing programs as well on there, the early Word and some others that no longer exist,
Right.
and the Apple version of
What was that? Mac, right?
Mac Write.
Yeah.
Yes, I
Yeah.
found a book for that too
Nice.
recently. Um, and we also had Print Shop. Do you remember Print Shop?
Yes. Yes.
You
I
could
think
print
it still exists, actually.
giant banners on
Image
the
writer
dot
printers.
matrix type printers.
Yeah.
So yeah, we had all of that, and the lab at Cal Poly also had an electrostatic plotter.
That's right.
So that was it was a heavy, massive thing, but it created these very clear drawings that you could print on transparent bond. So it looked like it was being printed on vellum, and then you could
Right.
take them to a regular, blueprint shop and get your blue lines, right?
Right. Yeah.
Um, which was in the building next door at Cal Poly and around the corner.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, that's right.
So yeah, so I worked in that lab. My primary job was actually a supervisor, and that was putting together student schedules and the staff schedules and getting people to work and paying people. But my real passion was fixing the computers
Okay.
when they broke. Which they did back then. So
Yeah.
I knew how to take a 2CI apart and put new memory in it, and new graphic cards, and just
Right.
take it apart, put new things back in it. Um, uh, I did more of that, and so I don't think I was a very good supervisor.
I'm trying to remember, did they had those networked, but they were kind of just all networked locally to each other, weren't they?
They were networked locally to each other, and it was kind of a pain because we did have internet at Cal Poly with email, but you had to go to a different lab in order to get your email.
Wow, I don't even remember that. That might have come later in like 93 or 94.
Well, let's just say I met I met a computer engineer, um, and he wasn't a Cal Poly student. He had actually just graduated from Stanford, and we had a mutual friend.
Uh-huh.
And so our long distance relationship was emails.
Oh my. Wow.
2 years of emails to each other from from Cal Poly to Silicon Valley. So anyway, so I married him, by the way, but
Okay. All right. Wow, so
uh,
you're really at the forefront of computer dating, if you will, long
yeah, I guess
before.
so. I guess so. Yeah, some of the friends in our group actually literally met online.
Yeah.
So like real early versions of meeting online. So I got married.
So other than some of the problems with obviously their computers breaking down, what were some of the other challenges that you had, in a Mac lab at Cal Poly at the time?
So there was a recent, well, maybe it's not that recent anymore, but there was a TV show called the IT
Was it called the IT crowd or
the
something?
IT crowd. Yes,
Yeah.
yes. Okay, so that's I felt like those people a lot of times because I mean everybody was so new to computers in there, and I would get questions like, I'm seeing a black screen, and literally it was, did you turn it on and off again? Because that was like that seemed even today, that seemed like the way you fix things is if
Right,
something went crashing or something, you saw the a blank screen or things just froze, just turn it on, turn it off.
right, right,
So I think the biggest challenges was being patient
right,
because I had the background of it, but almost everybody coming in were new to using the computers,
right.
and being patient and helping people learn how to use the tools that were given to us
Yeah.
in that lab.
I think it's also important to remind listeners that back then you didn't really come to school with a computer. So not every student had a computer. In fact, most students didn't. And so the computer lab was your computer.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It was pretty much your first and only exposure for a lot of people. And there was a time when they had some computers actually in some of the studios, but then they took them out, put them all in the computer lab as well. So I had a few classes where we were in the studios with the Macs and
Right. Some of us weren't very happy when they did that because every studio had like a Mac SE or a maybe a 2CI, but usually a
yes,
Mac SE in the studio, and it was available for anyone to use. And I know at some point they took them all out and put them all in the computer lab.
yeah,
I
yeah.
was like, hey, wait a minute. Now our computer that's available to us 24/7 isn't available to us 24/7.
Well, yeah. Sometimes I wonder if it was my fault because I used to like to prank people with the computers, and I would set up the computers so that it would have all these strange sound effects. So, like, when it ejected a disk, it would make a
Make a
vomit
noise.
sound.
Right, right.
When you would shut it down, I had a Luke Skywalker saying, "What a piece of junk." So,
Those were a lot of the fun things, though, that you could do with a Mac back
oh
then that
yeah,
really you couldn't do with, I mean, really, Windows didn't exist yet, maybe very, very early Windows, but you really couldn't do those types of things. And I know that was one of the appeals to the Mac even back then.
absolutely. I think the playfulness. They always kept the playfulness in it with the early computers that Apple made, and right into the Macintosh. Play seemed to be a big part of it.
Yeah,
Whereas the Windows, even when they advertised it, or any of the PCs, it was work, work, work. You always saw somebody in a suit, looking
right,
like they were an accountant.
right, right. Well, speaking of being an accountant, I guess, yeah. So after Cal Poly, I noticed you worked for a couple of different architects.
Mhm.
Were they Mac based offices, or what software were they using at the time?
They were. So when I got out of Cal Poly, it was still at the tail end of a recession.
Right,
And it was a little difficult to find a job. It did take me about 3 months to find a job. But this first firm that I worked for, they were an all Mac office, and they zeroed in on my supervisor at the Cal Poly lab, because they were having a hard time managing and networking their computers within their office, and it was only a four-person firm. It wasn't like it was a huge firm, but they were having problems managing that. So they decided to hire me, straight out of school, and my big responsibilities was IT
oh wow, interesting.
on top of working as a fresh out of school, basically intern.
Right.
We used at the time Architrion,
Oh my, right, I remember that.
which I had some minor experience with at Cal Poly. I really zoned in on ArchiCAD back then,
Yeah.
and so I only had minor experience with Architrion, but that firm was using that, and we had some. technical problems, and we'd have to call, their customer service, and they were in Quebec. And so when you call them, it would all be in French.
Oh, that's a challenge.
And then when you actually got on the phone with somebody and you had to speak English to them, they sounded so disgusted.
Right. Yeah, that sounds about right for
um,
Quebec.
yeah, so we used that for a while, and it was becoming a memory hog.
Hmm.
So we kept adding more memory to our machines, and it just didn't. It was crashing. So we decided to try out a different product called MiniCAD,
Oh yeah, right.
and I believe it was version 5 or 6 at the time.
Hmm.
And we put those on, and MiniCAD just ran cleaner and faster,
Right.
and wasn't as memory card intensive. So then it became my job to install all of that on all the new computers and begin training everybody on MiniCAD, even though I was new to MiniCAD, but I seem to have been picking it up faster than everybody else. And so then when I left that firm and went to another firm, they were also using MiniCAD, which was now at this time, I think, transitioning to being called Vectorworks.
Okay.
And that firm was so the first firm I worked for was almost 100% residential,
Uh-huh.
with some small commercial. And the next firm I worked for was 100% commercial with some residential here and there.
Okay, interesting.
And we were using Vectorworks. And what as Vectorworks grew, and actually some people may not know, but Vectorworks went full 3D around 99, 2000, and really started working on creating a full BIM platform before we were using the word BIM all the time.
Sure.
Um, and so we were using a little bit of 3D in 2000 to 2001. But mostly it was still mostly a 2D
Right.
platform for us in the office. And we did, like I said, we did commercial projects. But at that point, my IT necessity wasn't needed as much. Um, Everybody in the office knew enough about computers to kind of fix things when things didn't work, and it didn't fall squarely on my shoulders to be the IT person. So that was great.
Had an opportunity to do a little more architecture and a little less IT.
Exactly. I did.
Nice.
After being at that firm for 4 years, though, I finally decided I'm going out on my own, and I wasn't licensed yet.
Wow.
I made that decision that I had a few more tests to go, and I was going to go out on my own. I didn't want to do commercial work anymore. I had just done that. I did want to focus on residential, like the first firm I worked for, and decided to start my firm in 2003.
What inspired you after, think it was about 7 years of working for others, give or take?
Mhm.
What inspired you to do that?
I think I always wanted to be a firm owner. I think even when I was a
Okay.
kid and thinking about becoming an architect, I always imagined myself being Mike Brady working at home. Honestly, that was my thing. I saw, look at this is an architect. He's got this great home office and he's always drafting at home, right? That was
Right,
the dream,
right.
right? And I thought, I could do that. That sounds great. So I think I always had that in the back of my head. And actually, at the first firm that I was working for, I actually had an opportunity to buy the firm.
Oh,
But I just said, I'm just 3 years out of school. I'm not buying somebody's firm. I'm not ready yet.
right.
So, especially since I was very far from getting licensed at that point,
I see.
I hadn't even started taking the tests at that point. So yeah, I declined that. But I mean, everybody knew that ultimately my goal was that I would probably start my own firm. It was no
Okay.
surprise to anybody. Um, and the Kretschmers have a long line of being entrepreneurs, so it wasn't even a surprise to my family. It was like
Okay. So it's destined to probably happen then.
Yes, yes. Both minorly successful and very big failures. The Kretschmer's entrepreneurial spirit. So anyway,
Yeah.
so yeah, so I finally decided to do that, and the first part of after quitting my job was to finish those licensing exams
Right.
and get licensed. And just I was still trying to get new work
Hmm.
as a designer. So the firm was initially named J. Kretschmer Designs um, uh, until I got licensed.
I
So,
see.
and then, boy, it just went from there. After having the company for 2 years, I finally realized I needed help,
Okay.
and I hired independent contractor who had worked at the very first firm that I worked at. It didn't even occur to me that it was weird because he worked remotely when he worked for that company.
Oh, interesting.
And again,
Okay.
this was like 97, right? So
Uh-huh.
it didn't seem weird to me to hire him and have him work remotely because that's what he was doing at the other firm.
Okay. So you kind of fell into that whole remote work thing right from the start,
Yeah,
just to, for when you were had starting your own firm, your first employee was virtual.
my first employee was remote, but I did own an office at that point,
Okay.
and I did hire administrative staff, and then the recession hit.
Yes.
The Great Recession, 2008. The writing was on the wall, and before I started losing my shirt, I decided to get rid of the office and move everything into my home. And I had to, unfortunately, give up my administrative staff, but I kept my remote worker,
Hmm.
and and I moved everything very Silicon Valley style to my garage,
There you go. Right.
which is actually the same space I'm talking to you now, but in 2015 I remodeled this garage so that it was a full ADU. So
Okay. Great.
so I have
Much
heating and
better.
yeah, I have heating and air conditioning, and I don't have to look at the cars anymore.
Nice. Nice.
Plus, I have a restroom and a kitchenette in here too.
So it's like a real office, essentially.
I leave the house and walk into my detached ADU,
Right.
and I've made my commute to my workspace.
Just like the rest of us are doing to some extent now.
Yes, so that was 2008,
Yeah.
and we went fully remote.
Okay.
And so then it was just me and this other person. He's still working for me today, so he's now worked for me almost 16 years.
Wow.
By, let's see, 2015, 2016, sorry,
Yeah.
2016, after I remodeled this garage, things were taking off again. And that's when I started hiring more and more remote workers. And today I have a total of 6 remote workers. Um, uh, only the one who worked for me from the beginning is here in the Bay Area. The
Hmm.
rest are all over the United States, in Maine, in Michigan, in New Orleans, in Ohio, other places, and they're all licensed architects, by the way. Only the first person who still works for me is not licensed. Everybody else are licensed in their home state.
Since you had that experience with MiniCAD in those two other offices and then eventually Vectorworks, did you choose Vectorworks as your main platform for generating your drawings?
I did. I am still using Vectorworks to this day. We
Okay.
are, I wouldn't call ourselves fully BIM, but we are very close to being, more BIM full. We always use 3D in
Uh-huh.
every project now. And our standard template populates to our drawings. So it's become a much more efficient way to work, and also a much better presentation tool
Uh-huh.
with clients. They understand that better than 2D drawing. So yeah, we're using Vectorworks.
When you started doing all of your virtual office, how did the Mac either help and or hinder that process of working remotely? especially more so maybe in the early days before we had things like Dropbox and things that probably made working remotely a little bit easier. What sort of tools or things that you did on the Mac that made that process a little bit easier for you?
Yeah, so always, being a Mac user, always had to look at the competition of the PC market, right?
Yeah.
So many things were made for the PC, and it was sometimes hard to find good products that were in our industry for the Mac. So the biggest challenge was evaluating software for our use,
Hmm.
and finding something that works and wouldn't crash, was reliable uh, as software for our Mac. So in the second firm I worked for, we used QuickBooks on the
Okay.
Mac as well as the MiniCAD. And since I already was very proficient in both of them, I just used the same when I started my firm. When
Okay.
we went remotely, though, we got Gmail accounts.
Okay.
And so a lot of our files were transferred between us through email, and they were not very large because we weren't using full 3D back then, most 2D drawings, and they weren't very large. So we didn't need
Right.
something like Dropbox, or at the time they didn't have Google Drive as a product yet.
Uh-huh.
But they did have Gmail, and we also did a lot of talking on the phone. So one of the things I always tell people when you're going to make your staff remote, um, it's great that we have Zoom now. We can see each other, we can share screens, but being able to verbally communicate visual skills is key to really keeping that communication flow going.
Hmm.
So we spoke a lot on the phone, and we had to speak in architecture to each other, because we weren't able to share screens and we weren't able to
Right.
point at drawings. Um, but we were able to have very good, detailed conversations about what needed to be done over the phone. So for both of us, that was a great education. And then when we did need to see each other, we would meet at a coffee shop or something
Hmm.
like that, because he actually has a long commute to get to me, so we would
I
meet at
see.
some halfway point, and pull drawings out and have lunch and then split up. And he would also go to construction sites with me as well,
Okay.
um, for some projects. Um, so there were challenges, but it was completely we were able to fix it
Yeah.
without much challenge. And I think the key is the being able to communicate those visual skills verbally, knowing the language of architecture. So,
Right.
or having the same language of architecture.
Right.
So
How did you end up building out? You said you have six people working with you now. How did you build out that network of individuals? And are they all using Macs? Because I know Vectorworks is cross platform. So is everybody on a Mac?
not everyone is on a Mac, and
Uh huh.
since all of my staff are independent contractors, they buy their own equipment,
Okay.
including Vectorworks. They buy their own Vectorworks, so they put it on whatever computer they have. We haven't
Okay.
had any problems though transferring between PC or Mac version of Vectorworks. They
Uh
seem to
huh.
go back and forth seamlessly. It's only when we have like someone on a completely different version, like
Right.
that we actually have the translation problem. The computer problem is no longer an issue. And I navigated many things to cloud-based platforms,
Okay.
so that they can go cross-platform as well, but also so that I don't keep anything on my local drive, or try not to keep things on my local drive,
Right.
because we all work from laptops now.
Okay.
We used to have desktops. Now we all work from laptops. Get a really good graphics card on that laptop, and you can always drop a laptop, or it gets swiped or whatever. So we try
Right.
not to leave our native files um, solely on someone's laptop.
So do
Uh,
you have things set up on, are you using Dropbox or Google Drive for that?
I looked at different products, and I came across Citrix branded products.
Mm,
So we use ShareFile
okay.
um, for as our file transfers. We I use Podio for task management,
Mm,
and Write Signature for contract signing.
okay.
So those are all bundled together from Citrix
Okay.
for us to use. So and that seems to be working really well. I've tried different things here and there, and I know that there are products out there that are actually better than these products that I'm utilizing with other teams. We've expanded our teams to work with other architecture firms as well, so
Okay.
we use their components and their systems when we work with them. But I think for consistency, it's been good to have the those products together.
Uh-huh.
And then on top of that is creating an operations manual that I use a private Google site
Mm,
for our team that has basically the CAD standards or the BIM standards,
right.
as well as how we communicate with clients and how we look like we're one company rather than a group of independent contractors helping me out, which
Right.
is
Right.
which is the real reality. So things like communicate how to communicate with clients, how to what we name our files. All of those things are on a
Right.
on a on a on a on a Google site that is
Okay.
private to our users.
So you've been asked to speak on the subject of remote working and virtual office. What are some of the strategies? I don't want you to reveal everything that you would normally talk about, but what are some of those strategies that you do discuss, and how does the Mac figure into that, or Apple products in general figure into that?
Yeah, well, with AIA continuing education, you're not allowed to talk on a about a specific product in case it
Oh,
looks like a
okay.
sales chip.
Got it.
So my course is quite a bit more general,
Okay.
but it's based on getting your company set up as a virtual and remote working firm, as well as
Mm-hmm.
discussing the advantages and disadvantages of it. The thing that I already talked about, the verbal communication skills while speaking about
Right.
graphic things, is key in my session. Other advice is on backing up files, having a company culture. Some company culture is far more important than some people may have given credit to in the past. And it seems like it's a difficult thing to navigate when you are remote, but
Right.
it requires a conscious setup of what that culture is going to be, even if you're remote. And if
Mm-hmm.
you're switching from, an all office environment and then moving to more remote, what are the things that make your company unique? Um,
Mm-hmm.
how are you going to continue that as being remote? I've seen some great examples of companies making keeping their culture alive through the pandemic, even though they're remote, because they were very conscious about those things. So
Mm.
our culture is a culture of freedom.
Okay.
So which is kind of the whole reason why I moved my company to my home and then only hired people that were remote, qualified, but also working remote. Is I just saw in the field of architecture that we are still running people until they're ragged and overworked, and some people losing the love of it because there's not as much balance. And I
Mm-hmm.
think we talk a lot in architecture about balancing our life and our work now. But I think now with the pandemic, people are being a lot more aware of it. And that was my initial goal and part of the company culture when I decided to just not hire people as employees, but have only independent contractors, was that I saw a lot of my friends leaving architecture for either tech or
Hmm.
to stay home and raise their children. So, you know, Rosa's the equity.
The missing 32%
Yeah,
originally, yes.
yeah, that hit home a lot because um, I saw that there was a gap there of people with a lot of skill, but just can't do, you know, the 40 to 60-hour weeks.
Hmm.
And so pretty much everyone who works for me has some sort of challenge in their life that keeps them from being able to work in a regular office.
I see.
So the first person I hired, he's been caring for his mom for a long time. You know, I have someone else whose husband is in the military and they move a lot,
Okay.
and then had their first child, and she's about to move again. I have a retiree.
Uh-huh.
Someone who just, you know, just worked for a large firm, decided to retire, and then said, hell, I want to keep working. So
Right.
I have people with, you know, very, very different, you know, life situations, and we're able to make it work because I am not caring about the time that they sit in the chair. I
Yeah.
care about the tasks that they perform. So that's another bit of advice I give to people is when you're working, have people working remotely,
Uh-huh.
getting things accomplished, being clear about the tasks that need to happen. Those are far more important than how many hours somebody spends on something.
Right.
So, and following through with that, for the most part, I do not bill hourly. I bill my clients a fixed fee, and we
Uh-huh.
make it all work within that, so that I don't have to worry about not making my bills because someone's not in their seat for
Right.
30 hours on that one project.
You mentioned with COVID and the whole work from home for everybody now, have any of your strategies really changed or have certain ones been more reinforced because everybody over the last 14 or 15 months has been working virtually?
Our biggest change is not within our team. Our
Okay.
biggest change was with our clients because prior to the pandemic, we would still meet with clients in person. We would hold just the regular kind of meeting, sitting around a coffee table or, you know, or a conference room table and going through the drawings. So because we already had our systems in place as our team, we
Uh-huh.
took those same systems and then put them to the client facing, and taught and trained our clients how to work with us remotely. So that was our biggest challenge with the pandemic. And now that we've done it, I'm almost like, I don't want to go back. And with that, I've also been able to gain clients who are, I have a client who's in Taiwan.
Hmm.
I have a client who's in Georgia. You know, I have a client who owns another house in Southern California. And so we are able to meet in utilizing actually Zoom
Yeah.
on the Macintosh and being able to move forward projects without actually having to physically be in the same room. So
Right.
taking those systems we use, like Google Drive. I mentioned that earlier. We use Google Drive and Google Docs, Google Sheets, all of those products
Hmm.
quite a bit. Google Sites I can create a website for my client to keep track of everything through the project. Google Docs we use with them as well. So we also use the photos at house.com with clients to communicate
Okay.
with each other. Yeah, as I mentioned, we're moving a lot more towards online and cloud-based and not necessarily Macintosh native products anymore.
Now, something I found interesting is you offer a virtual firm education services. Can you talk a little bit about what that is and how that works for you?
It is in its infancy,
Okay.
and it was kind of based on how Mark has the Entree Architect Mastermind.
Uh-huh.
It's just a way for people who are interested in virtual offices to get my blog content, but also have a meeting with me once a month to
Hmm.
ask questions and talk about challenges within their virtual office. So that's really what that is. It's still very young. And it might get transferred to another product because I am developing a new coursework. Um, and hopefully we can get that coursework off the ground pretty soon because we do have a lot of firms who are thinking about what are we going to do now that we're moving back into the office or having the ability to move back into the office.
Right.
A lot are asking themselves, do we really want to do that? What do we want to learn from this pandemic, and how do we want to move forward with our firms? I'm seeing a lot more firms and a lot more staff saying, I'd rather just try to continue doing things the way we're doing and maybe
Right.
some sort of a hybrid model. So I'm developing content on that with a partner who also runs a virtual firm doing large projects,
Okay.
and that's what that's all about. I'm also on the practice management knowledge community. I'm on the leadership with another architect who runs his firm. He's been doing it for about 10 years. He's been running it virtually and remotely, and he also does very large institutional commercial
Mm.
projects. So it's not just, even though I'm a residential architect primarily or small commercial, it's not just small projects that can be done this way.
Right.
There are firms who are successfully navigating this with large projects and are happy to continue it. So, and a lot of them are Mac based too.
That's good to hear. One other thing I wanted to touch on before we take a quick break is your art. You've incorporated your passion for art into your practice, and you used to co-own and run an art gallery, actually. And so I just touch on that for a bit. How is that incorporated into your practice?
These days, I don't feel like it's very incorporated, honestly.
Okay.
I haven't been able to paint or do much of that because there's so much work in architecture. But I
Okay.
will say that that all started with the recession, with the lack of architecture projects.
Uh-huh.
I wanted to see, what can I do with my art career and how can I promote it? And so I did become co-owner of a gallery and was showing my artwork and selling my artwork at that gallery, as well as the artwork of about 20 other artists.
Hmm.
And I started listening to a podcast called Artists, Artists Helping Artists. That podcast primarily focused on the business and marketing of art. And
Oh, interesting.
actually, that led towards business and marketing within my architecture firm, which is a whole nother thing we could talk about.
Right.
but I learned so much from that podcast, and it really opened my eyes about marketing and about business of creative ventures, right? I mean, it's really more about not just art, but of any kind of creative type venture.
Hmm.
So during the recession, I supplemented my architecture income with this artwork, and I probably painted about 50 paintings a year at that time,
Wow.
and sold, and then of course put them in the gallery and sold them. And I loved watercolors. I experimented with iPad painting
Okay.
and taught iPad painting classes at the gallery.
What's your favorite iPad painting app then?
I love Procreate.
Okay.
And then my second favorite is Sketch Club.
Sketch
Uh,
Club. Okay.
yeah, Sketch Club. Sketch Club is fast and easy to use, and I actually started plein air painting, that means outdoor painting, with my
Okay.
iPad. People would, it started with me getting kicked out of Santana Row for painting watercolors at Santana Row without a permit.
Oops.
That is a Santana Row, for those who don't know, is a shopping center in San Jose, and it's a very high upscale shopping center. And I sat down to started painting my watercolors, and a security guard came by and said, "You can't paint here. Do you have a permit?" And I'm like, "I don't have a permit." He's like, "Well, I have to walk you to your car." And
Oh my. Wow.
and so then I came back with my iPad, and it just looked like another person sitting there with their iPad, but I was painting.
Oh, clever. Okay.
So I enjoy plein air painting, painting outdoors whenever I can. And so that's sort of what the art career started with, having more time during the recession, and then just continued to today. And I did get commissions to do murals
Oh,
and things like that. So I think I have one mural on my website that I actually got good pictures of, and so
wow. That's fascinating.
yeah.
That's great. What a way to supplement your income during a great recession. And do you have any of your clients buying your artwork for their homes that you're doing?
Yes, yes, yes. And
Okay.
and I actually will sometimes give my clients one of my paintings, when they move in. So usually not an original. I usually give them one of the G Clays,
Okay.
a reproduction. But
Is
yeah.
that another marketing tip?
Oh,
Giving away your artwork is part,
well,
at the
yes,
end of a client project.
yes, because always be marketing, right?
Right, right. Okay, so we're going to take a short break, and after we're going to learn a little bit more about your Mac and Apple journey right after this. Support for Inside the Apple Studio comes from Monograph. Are you tired of using dated and clunky software to manage your firm? Or do you feel frustrated wrangling all of your spreadsheets to get a clear view of where your projects stand today? Monograph is here to help. Designed by architects for architects, Monograph allows you to track your time, your projects, and your budgets in real time. With their awesome Money Gantt, you can immediately see whether you are under or over budget. Do you need to adjust your projects week to week? Their new tool, Resource, allows you to reallocate your team's time and track its impact on your remaining budget. Be proactive with Monograph. Learn more at monograph.com, and thanks to Monograph for their support. Welcome back, Jennifer. We've explored your architecture journey and a number of other things along the way as well, including your early exposure to Apple and the Mac at Cal Poly. Now let's go a little further and talk about your use of Apple products and how they help you run your practice. And you've already mentioned one of my first questions you answered earlier. You had a Mac 2CI, which you bought at the El Corral bookstore. I bought my first, actually not my first Mac, I bought my second Mac when I graduated to take advantage of a significant student discount that they used to be able to get at college for Apple products. I think I bought a Sentra 610, which lasted for all of about maybe 5 months before they replaced it with the Quadra. But how often do you upgrade your Macs, for your practice? Do you have like a plan every 2 or 3 years, or you just kind of let it go for a long time and then replace it? What's your kind of strategy on that?
Yeah, so it's a little bit of a business plan, so the financial plan, as well as what's going on with technology. And financial plan, I also look at like the depreciation right on your taxes, and so whether I got to depreciate it or not. But for the most part, I'm a little bit lazy as well. I don't want to have to change every single time you get a new Mac, right?
Yeah.
You got to upload everything and new uploads, and then you got to make sure you have the right version and that things don't crash. And so, being someone who's used Apple products and Mac products for a long time, the number one bit of advice is never buy generation one.
Yes, I've heard that.
And so let other people beta test the generation before you jump in, even though you really, really want to.
Right,
That
right.
has always been my big thing is that I really want the new Apple thing, but I can't because I know that I need to wait till they work out those bugs.
So you don't have an M1 based Mac yet, I
I
take
do
it.
not. That's right. I do not have an M1 based Mac yet. Usually it's about every 3 years that I circulate and get a new product. Although I will say that Mac 2 CI, man, I kept that almost, gosh, I think it was 1998. I think I had it 8 years,
Right,
and I remember it like one of those things, every 2 years I would put more memory in it or a new card or something. And I remember in 1998, I put the two new upgraded bits of RAM in there,
right.
and I think I had too much static, and I turned the thing
Oh
on, and
no.
it played the March of Death. Have you ever heard the Mac 2
I
CI
have
March to
actually
March of
heard
Death?
that. Thankfully it was not a personal experience where a machine went bad, but I have heard that it's like a car crash, isn't it? Or am I thinking of a different one?
No, it's like it's a little song. It's a little something like that. I can't remember the song. Oh, my heart just sank. I was like, oh, I blew up my computer. And I didn't really think of it like, oh, it's been 8 years. Come on. So yeah, I was running MiniCAD on that thing for years. And then, and then after that, I got into the regular routine of every like 3 years of basically just getting a new Mac product. And I've had everything from the Cube. Do you remember the Cube?
I've got one. Yes.
Ah, yeah, yeah. So the Cube had no power supply within. It had an external power supply that was basically like a big giant box that was on the floor, like an AC adapter like thing. But then the Cube had no fan in it, so it was
Right.
super quiet. Had this, I don't know, natural flowing cooling tower.
Yeah.
That was a cool product. I had the mirror drive, the one that
Uh-huh.
had the mirrors on the front cover, and oh, those were great because they were so easy to modify. That one I probably kept longer than I think I had it for 6 years and kept running it,
Uh-huh.
and because you could open it and just shove new stuff in it and then shut it. It was so easy to upgrade. Um, I actually still have a Mac Mini from 2008
Hmm.
that I just keep in the office, and whenever I'm like, I don't want to, it's actually in the house
Uh-huh.
office, and it's like I don't want to go out to my studio to go turn the Mac on just to do some search on a larger screen because I have to admit I'm getting old and searching on the phone is not so easy anymore. I can't read it. I'll just boot up the mini that I've had since 2008 and just
Right.
run the internet off of it. So yeah, I've had pretty much. I never had one of the colored bubble iMacs, but we had one of those at my office, and I never had one of those because they weren't powerful enough for running the CAD. But yeah, and I still have a first generation iPod in my car,
Oh, really?
permanently attached to my car so that it has my thousand songs on it, so I just
Just rotate through
I
those
just
thousand
rotate
songs.
through my favorite thousand songs. That doesn't really change that much. So
Right, right.
so yeah, there's Apple products like floating all over my house. I have an iPhone 4, I have an iPhone 5 still lying around.
So what Mac are you currently using?
I am using a MacBook Pro. So another bit of advice is that don't always buy just their standard thing.
Right.
They have a standard model. You need to customize your Mac. And yeah, it seems like it's going to cost you more money, but it really doesn't. What they have as a standard Mac that's available, you can really customize and get a lower price or customize it even more. So I have a MacBook Pro.
Is it a 16 inch?
It is a 13 inch.
13 inch. Okay.
So I run a second or third monitor to the side. And I think it's an i5 chip.
You're ready for that next
Yeah.
M1 PowerBook or PowerBook. There's an old one. Sorry.
Yeah.
Mac.
I had one of those too. I had a PowerBook Wall Street.
Oh, yeah. The black one. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a good one.
And then I had one of those first MacBook Pros or MacBooks that were titanium. I don't think the ones that are now are titanium. I think there's some other metal that's,
The new ones are all aluminum.
yeah,
The titanium PowerBook G4, that was a pretty remarkable machine.
yeah, that one I kept around until it got dropped.
Oh, ouch. You're ready for that next MacBook, hopefully this summer. That'll be a second generation.
I'm on my third year with this current laptop. So I think the biggest problem that I have is that I have been using QuickBooks Pro since I started my business,
Uh-huh.
and QuickBooks for Mac has been on and off getting discontinued, not discontinued. So I'm not sure what cycle we're in, but I know for sure that the current version of QuickBooks that I'm running will not run on the next Mac. So I will definitely have to buy new software. So, and then that's the hard thing about when you have the desktop software is, and you've been running it for so many years. I have so many years of data and I don't
Right.
want to lose that data because that's how I charge my fees is to go back and look at the data, right?
Right. Sounds like that Mac Mini of yours is going to get some more use out of the future so you can still run your old Mac QuickBooks on that while you transfer to something new.
That could be. I've made my husband my accountant, so we have QuickBooks running on his Mac, which by the
Okay.
way, it's his first Mac he's ever had. I'm so happy that I have finally converted him.
How did that conversion happen?
I think I just the earworm of me, like every single time something would happen with his PC, I would see like, you know what? That never happens to me on my Mac.
Right,
And
right.
I think it finally happened, he
Yeah.
finally, and then also when he worked for Google, they gave all their employees at that time Macs. It was
Okay.
prior to Chromebook. They gave them all Macs because the PCs were had too many security holes.
Right.
And so they wanted them running Macs with I think Linux on them as well. So he had his first use of a Mac through his employer,
Okay.
but then finally decided to buy his own because of the security things that he was told from Google and as well as my earworms. So
Right, right. So you've been using Vectorworks for a long time.
yes.
Do you have like the Vectorworks designer, the whole suite, or you just use the architecture portion? And are there other apps that you use in conjunction with Vectorworks to produce the drawings that you do?
Yes, so I use Vectorworks Architect product solely, nothing else.
Okay.
But I do export my models and use a little service called Modelo IO. Yes, Modelo like the beer.
Okay.
.io. It is a cloud-based site where you can upload your models, IFC or any other, I usually use 3DMs.
Hmm.
Um, and it makes it very easy to share with clients.
Oh,
Vectorworks does
interesting.
have a cloud-based portal that you can upload and you can share with clients, but the for some reason, for me, I don't like the way the models look when they go up on the Vectorworks cloud to share that with the clients. But the Modelo comes in however I want it to. And I like early on in schematic design to give my clients something that looks like a foam core model,
Okay.
a
Yeah.
white foam core model so that they're not too hung up on things like, the roofing material or the siding material or whatever it is. I want them to see the shape and the forms.
Right.
And Modelo does that very, very well. And it does shading and everything in it. You type in what city you're in, you type in what time of day, and it automatically does a heliodon on your model, even if you didn't have a heliodon on your model when you initially exported it. So I like that little product. Yeah, but
Okay.
we've have SketchUp and we've tried it, but I'm not very proficient in it. So some of my other workers will use SketchUp and then
Uh-huh.
import into Vectorworks. You can also import Revit models into Vectorworks as well. So if someone's
Right.
working on Revit, they can import and also export the other way too. So I have one project where we are working as a consultant of another larger firm, and they're a Revit firm, but I'm the design architect. So I'm designing things in Vectorworks. I send it to my staff member who uploads it to the Revit model and populates it to the model that's on BIM 360. So
Okay, interesting. And that all works pretty well.
it seems to, but I'm not the one doing the nitty gritty of it, so I'm not sure. I'm not sure what the gotchas are, but it seems to be working pretty well with us and being able to communicate with that.
Yeah.
Another thing I love online for presentation and design, and also design collaboration is Miro, Miro.
Uh-huh.
It is a it is like doing a charrette board. So if you can imagine in the not virtual world, but in the real world of having a big giant whiteboard and everybody sticks things up on the board and puts
Right.
post-it notes and then sketches on top of things, Miro is a tool that allows you to do that in the virtual environment.
Wow.
And we've had really great collaborative meetings talking about the design of the project and moving things around while on a combination of like Zoom and then Miro.
Oh, interesting.
Really great product. We love using. So those are some like the design and presentation tools. I still use Photoshop. You know,
Mm-hmm.
I think Photoshop was something one of the first things I had on my Mac 2 CI.
Uh-huh.
And I actually use Photoshop Elements on my Mac because it is a lesser expensive but still a very good quality product
Right.
to edit images and cut and paste things. Sometimes with clients early on, I have a picture of their existing house and I'll Frankenstein it on Photoshop, just to kind of give them some ideas of what it could be and see before I go deeply into design and just get some early feedback. So Photoshop Elements is really good for that.
So you mentioned you use QuickBooks for accounting, but you're having to move away from that. I'm curious to peek into your thoughts about what you're going to do for the future on that.
I'm actually honestly not sure. I have
Okay.
tried some other products like ArchiOffice.
Uh-huh.
I found, at least for me, ArchiOffice a little overwhelming. There's
Yeah.
almost too many choices. And I also tried QuickBooks Online, and that was a fiasco. I
Mm.
did not like their online version. Of course, it was pretty new then, so
Yeah.
maybe it's better now. But like I couldn't get my checks to print correctly, and like now who uses checks? But
Right. Right.
but it was just some little things that just was very difficult. So I'm not sure exactly where I'm going to go since I'm not doing the accounting anymore. I'm going to let my husband like mess around.
Less of a concern.
Yeah, yeah. Well, basically, I just give them the parameters. We need to keep our data,
Right. Right.
and it needs to be easy for you to use because he doesn't like QuickBooks. He complains all the time about it, whereas
Yeah.
I'm used to it, so it doesn't bother me the quirkiness of the software.
Right.
But yeah, if you're starting out your firm, I don't necessarily recommend QuickBooks right off the bat. I think it's a slowly dying platform.
Might be. Is there anything you use for like project management?
Yeah, so Podio is my favorite project management tool, and it's one of those Citrix products.
Okay, that's right.
Podio, it's, how do I explain it? It's sort of like you create your own apps to work within Podio. It's
Interesting.
set up as a task management, but you create your own app. So I have a project, let's say a project app, where the project information is on a job board. Because everybody's independent contractors with me,
Hmm.
they have to kind of pick their jobs and send me a proposal for what they want, which projects they want to do. So in
Oh,
order to
interesting.
communicate with them, I have a job board on Podio that as soon as a contract is signed, I put that up on the job board, and they can see the scope of work, the anticipated number of hours, the schedule, who the client is, all of the, who's the jurisdiction, all of the pertinent information
Uh-huh.
populated onto that job board. And then at the bottom of the job board is tasks. And I have another app that is a task app, but from that job board, I can click on a button and create a task, and it'll populate it to another area so everybody can see what tasks are assigned to them. But it also remains connected to that job in the job board. So,
Mm.
so you can look at them both ways. So, again, I said we primarily are task based, so it's up to me to tell everybody what their tasks are, what phase of the project we're in, and what's the expected timeline for things to happen. So that gets populated also through Podio.
What task app you mentioned a task app that you use to
Oh,
generate that?
it's within Podio. It's
Oh,
just
it's
called
within it.
tasks.
I see.
So,
Okay.
so you can either create your own apps on Podio, or you can use apps that someone else has already created
Oh, interesting.
in order to create your company system.
I
So
see.
in our company system, we have that job board, which is called projects. We have the tasks, which is also called tasks. We have the schedule. Um, I have to look at Podio and remind
See all the
myself
different things that are there.
what we have on there. Yeah. And there's also kind of like Slack. There's
Hmm.
also a way for us to chat and communicate through Podio as well. But it goes directly back to that job board. So someone creates a chat, we can keep within that job board, within that specific job, all the communications within there. But we are creatures of habit. We do tend to shoot back to email
Right.
very often.
So is this Podio a service that you pay for,
Yes,
essentially? Okay.
through Citrix is the owner of Podio.
Okay.
Now I do use Slack, and I love Slack, by the way, as well. That is a really good communication tool, but it doesn't do the task management like Podio does. So,
Right.
it's I think the main thing is to try different things and find out what works for the way you like your processes to
Right. Right.
happen. So let me look at my apps folder and see what else I have on my
Okay.
Macintosh. Um, that are some of my favorites. So I mentioned Photoshop and Photoshop Elements. Love using that. Let's see. I of course still use all of the Microsoft Excel, PowerBook,
PowerPoint.
PowerPoint,
Yeah.
and Word.
Hmm.
Although I'm starting to navigate more towards the Google products of those. But for example, I use PowerPoint a lot for my presentations
Hmm.
when I'm talking about like the virtual office, or now as president of the AIA Silicon Valley chapter, our meetings are all online, so
Uh,
I create PowerPoint presentations, but we use Zoom, and I can record a video with PowerPoint,
hmm.
and create a webinar, and then upload that either to my website, like some of the stuff you've seen on my website, or our YouTube channel.
Something I wanted to ask you about. You offer a number of free guides on your website, and they all look fantastic. What do you use to produce those on your Mac?
Oh, that's great. A combination of things, but a lot of it is mostly Word
Oh,
to
really?
create those. Also Pages,
Okay.
Apple Pages.
Right.
Apple Pages is very graphic user interface, so what we call GUI, very
Hmm.
that type of an interface. So I do like that as well. It's sort of like there used to be a word, more like a publishing tool
Hmm.
that I can't I can't remember the name.
Was it Right Now, or it wasn't Word Perfect? Nissus Writer was another one.
I don't remember the names, but Pages is more like that. It is more like a publishing tool.
Right.
So that's why I like that, and it comes free with your Mac. So I mean, like, if you want things to look graphically great, that's a good
Hmm.
way to really orient. It feels like you're putting your high school yearbook together sometimes, but
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
it's really easy to use. Those guides, I wish I could say I was the genius who came up with the idea of putting those on my website, but the reality is I learned all of that from Architects Marketing Institute.
Okay.
It is like Entree Architect, but a different group. And their primary focus is to teach architects how to market their businesses.
Okay.
And the leader of the company, he no, Enoch Sears was part of it at one time. He's not part
Uh-huh.
of it anymore. But the other leader came directly from marketing. Like
Okay.
he has his origin story of going into architect marketing, of meeting an architect who happened to come to one of his marketing things and realizing that architects need more help than, say, a financial analyst or a lawyer.
Right.
And so the Architects Marketing Institute was born, and they have a very well put together system of teaching architects how to do certain things on their websites with marketing, and primarily as those guides.
Yeah.
And they actually have templates. So they started with templates that I modified and added my own things
Okay.
to it, and then put them up on my website. So, including the booking calendar as well. That was an idea through marketing. Architects Marketing Institute, and the booking calendar has really saved my life through this pandemic,
Uh-huh.
because um, I don't answer my phone anymore. I wait for people to fill out the form on the website, and then uh, arrange an appointment with them, and or they have arranged a booking appointment with me
Yeah.
already. And so most of my projects come through my website and then come through this booking calendar rather than people calling me or just emailing me. So,
That's fascinating. All right. So as we come to getting closer to the closing part of this segment, I want to ask you, what is the favorite thing about using a Mac and your other Apple devices?
I think that it's just their ease. I think they're very intuitive.
Hmm.
And so it's very easy to just pick up things. And although it's a piece of software or an app that I've never used before, I just feel like I'm able to figure it out very quickly. And the reliability. I Macs will crash like anything else, but I don't find them crashing very often.
Yeah.
I never turn my laptop off anymore. In fact, I have to remind myself to reboot it every once in a while, or even shut it down, like give it a break,
Right.
because I leave everything just on all the time, and they're just working.
If anyone's listening and considering using a Mac in their business, what piece of advice would you give them?
I think to start with, um, what's the most important software that you're going to use. So if your BIM software is going to be something that's not going to run on a Mac, you have to, or isn't native to Mac, I should say, you have to figure out how to make that work on the Mac, and go back and look at the technical specifications for that software. So I always start, since Vectorworks is such an important part of our business, I always start with Vectorworks and look at what the system requirements are, and
Hmm.
especially that graphics card. And then I bump up to the next level graphics card and customize a Mac for myself that's going to optimize the use of that software. And then all the other software just falls in place, because none of them are as graphic or memory intensive as Vectorworks.
Right. Or that main piece of software that you're running your business on,
Exactly.
creating your income from, basically. So
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
I appreciate you sharing your Apple journey with us. And before we move to our final segment, I want to share, like you, to share with the audience one app, utility, or service that you find most useful. I think you've kind of already told us, but I'd like you to tell us, what do you think is your most important one?
Yes, Vectorworks is 100% the most important piece of software and bit of my business, in our firm. I have been a user for more than 20 years. I am not the only user that has that kind of longevity with it. Anton Predoct has been using
Hmm.
Vectorworks for over 20 years. And it's affordable. So for a small firm, it's easy to afford. It's reliable, and the customer service is great. So I mean, I can't say enough good things about Vectorworks in general, which has made it so hard for me to even look at any other product because like the team at Vectorworks, they always make sure that they always call me to make sure my software is running well. You
Right.
know, they have conferences, they've invited me to conferences, I've been to their events. I mean, I just feel very well supported, as well as that it's a software package that I feel very comfortable and very reliable. So,
Awesome. That's great. Thank you for sharing that. All right. So let's move to our final segment, which is going to be our 10 questions. You ready?
all right, let's see.
Okay. Number one, our first question. What's your favorite word?
Gosh, this is so hard because I like so many words. But I think the one that's just popping in my head is exuberance. I am, as you can tell, I am a person who is likes to talk and likes to be out there, and I like to be excited by things, and so I think that's probably my favorite word.
So, what's your least favorite word?
I don't know, anything negative. So maybe it's just negative. I don't know.
Okay. That works. So, what turns you on creatively, spiritually, or emotionally?
I am very drawn to nature. When I paint, I like to paint outdoors. When I paint in the studio, I'm usually painting flowers or landscapes. I love being connected to the outdoors, and I find that really inspires me both in my art life and in my architecture life. I like things to fit within their neighborhood context and within their environment.
What turns you off?
Oh, I don't know. Anything too industrial or smelly.
What sound or noise do you love?
Birds chirping is my favorite sound.
And what sound or noise do you hate?
A car crashing into my fence. The sound of a car screeching, yes, because people tend to crash into my fence here. So,
Okay, all right. That sounds a little close to home, literally. What's your favorite curse word?
oh gosh, I don't know. Lately, it isn't even a curse word, but whenever I get mad, I start saying fart knockers. And my husband and kids think it's hilarious. I don't even know where it came from, but I think that works as my curse word, even though it's not a real curse word.
That's okay. I don't have to bleep that one then.
Fart knockers.
What profession other than your own would you like to attempt?
Mm. So I consider art as one of my professions. So architecture and art are combined. So I'm not going to say art, but honestly, I'm really drawn lately to like marketing and advertising, and it goes back to that 12-year-old, test I took when I was 12, right? That said my best careers are artist, architect, or advertising, and I do tend to like marketing quite a bit. So I think I could do okay in marketing.
What profession would you not like to do?
Mm. I could not be, uh, I could not work on a garbage truck or waste treatment.
That goes back to that smelly comment
Yeah,
earlier.
exactly.
Okay. And our last question, if heaven exists, what would you like to hear God say when you arrive at the pearly gates?
Oh my gosh. Um, uh, gosh. I would hope that God would say to me that I made an impact, that I made a positive impact in the world and the environment. So I would like to hear God say, good job, we're glad you're here.
That's wonderful. That's a great way to sum it up. Jennifer, I'd like to thank you again for joining me on this episode of Inside the Apple Studio and tell our listeners where they can best find you online.
So you can find me at my website, which is jkretschmer.com. So the first letter of my first name and my last name.com. You can find me there. You can also find me at AIASiliconValley.org, where I am currently the AIA Silicon Valley president.
Great. Well, Jennifer, I really appreciate your time and thank you again for joining me today.
Thank you so much, Neal. It's been a fun time.
Great.
Okay, bye now.
I have been your host, Neal Pan, and thank you for listening to this episode of Inside the Apple Studio. I'd like to thank my guest, Jennifer Kretschmer, for joining me, and Monograph for their support. Learn more about Monograph at monograph.com. Find the show in your favorite podcast player by searching for Inside the Apple Studio, and support the show by leaving a 5-star rating and comment in Apple Podcasts. Remember to follow the show by selecting the follow button in Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcast app. Inside the Apple Studio is a production of Apple for Architects at appleforarchitects.com.